Rain lashed David's cracked windshield as he dreaded the stressful night ahead. You and I know how destiny tests us. He had no clue the stranded driver he would help was the date he wanted to avoid. A simple, unseen act of kindness was about to change their lives forever. David Sterling tightly gripped the steering wheel. Inside his battered 1998 Ford pickup, his knuckles turned white as the heavy Seattle rain slammed the roof. At 34, this honest, hard-working mechanic was barely keeping his shop afloat. Living on Bellevue's rough edge, this dedicated father raised 7-year-old Emma, his only light in a tough world. Tonight he traded his oily mechanic coveralls for a worn charcoal suit, a suit untouched since his painful, messy divorce years ago. His ex had left him broke and drowning in debt after a bitter custody battle. He saved Emma, but now the bank was threatening to seize his late father's repair shop. In the middle of this crushing stress, his persistent sister, Rachel, finally convinced him to go on a blind date. You cannot spend the rest of your life married to carburetors, transmission fluid, and mounting bills, Dave. Rachel had scolded him over the phone just 2 hours ago. Her name is Tori. She works in corporate management. She's smart, successful, and needs a genuine guy who doesn't wear designer vests and brag about stock portfolios all night. Just show up at Lasson's by 7, please, for me. Lasson's. Just hearing the name of that place made him sick. A fancy downtown French spot where one small plate cost more than a week of his groceries. He had only $50 cash and a completely maxed-out credit card. He dreaded the shallow judgment, bracing for the moment Tori would ask what he did for a living. He hated the thought of watching her eyes glaze over with polite, quiet disappointment. Now let's look 10 miles away, down a wealthy, winding road near Mercer Island. Victoria Harrington was dealing with a very different kind of nightmare. At 32 years old, Victoria was the highly successful CEO of Harrington Global Holdings, a massive billion-dollar real estate and technology empire. She had spent her afternoon defeating a business rival in a takeover to win the historic Pendleton Tower, leaving her bitter competitors, especially a greedy board member named Richard Carmichael, completely speechless. But despite her immense wealth and power, she felt empty and deeply alone inside. Her closest friend and publicist, Jessica, had suddenly set her up on this blind date. You need a connection to the real world, Vic. Jessica insisted, sliding a high-end reservation card across her massive mahogany desk. He is a hardworking, decent guy, a single father with absolutely no agenda. No corporate greed, no hidden motives, just a genuine good man. Think of it as a break before you completely burn out. Victoria thoroughly disliked the entire idea. She hated showing vulnerability, dreading the thought of sitting across from someone. A simple, well-meaning man who would only see her wealth and be terrified by it. But fate needs an opening. Wanting to escape her heavily guarded, sterile routine, she dismissed her bodyguards, choosing to drive herself to the date in her luxury car. Imagine a flawless British racing green 1969 Jaguar E-Type. But driving it was a total mistake. Trust me, gorgeous classic cars always act like spoiled divas. She'd later explain that rounding a dark curve, the car shuddered. A loud, violent knocking noise began echoing from under the hood. Then the engine died completely, robbing her of all power. Her expensive, shiny ride just rolled to a pathetic stop. Imagine her panic, stuck miles from nowhere, swallowed by a brutal rainstorm. Victoria slammed the steering wheel, swearing in a way no one would expect from a CEO. Grabbing her phone, she saw there was absolutely zero signal in that secluded area. A heavily wooded, pitch-black valley on the lonely island. She was stuck there in a $3,000 designer silk dress, shivering as the freezing dampness crept inside her drafty classic car. Meanwhile, back on the main highway, Interstate 90 was a total parking lot because of a massive crash. Checking my cracked clock, it was 6:15 p.m. I sighed and exited. I decided to head across Mercer Island to get into downtown Seattle. I had known those narrow back roads like the back of my hand for years. It was a rough detour, but my only real shot at making this blind date by 7. My old truck's headlights cut through the heavy rain on that dark, lonely road. Suddenly, my high beams caught the unmistakable reflection of vintage chrome. I tapped the brakes, slowing down. Sitting on the narrow shoulder was the sleek, beautiful frame of a broken Jaguar. My mechanic brain kicked in instantly. You and I know that leaving a classic car stranded in the mud is a crime. But more importantly, leaving another human being stranded in a dangerous storm is something you just do not do. I knew stopping meant I would be terribly late for a date I already dreaded. But decency matters most when nobody is looking. I couldn't just pass. I pulled my old Ford over, tires crunching on the wet gravel, and turned my hazards on. Inside, Victoria startled as my dim yellow headlights filled her dark rearview mirror. Her heart began pounding a terrifying, frantic beat against her ribs. Years of high-profile corporate security briefings had conditioned her to view any unexpected encounter as a threat. She reached into her luxury bag, clutching a can of pepper spray like a shield. Watching me, a big, broad-shouldered stranger, climb out of my beat-up pickup truck. I pulled my cheap jacket over my head and ran through the downpour to her window. I definitely did not look like some dangerous criminal. Just an exhausted, utterly drenched mechanic, wearing a cheap, worn-out suit that had seen far better days. I knocked gently on her wet window. "Are you all right in there?" I called out, my voice fighting against the howling, icy wind. She hesitated, gripping her defense spray, then rolled the glass down just 2 inches. Damp, pine-scented air flooded her expensive car. "I am completely fine." She lied instantly. Her voice was freezing cold, sharp, and full of authority. "My security team is on the way." I raised a skeptical eyebrow, cold rain dripping off my hair right onto my nose. I glanced inside at her completely dead dashboard. No radio dial, no lights. I looked back at her. "Right. Unless your squad has a magic tow truck that bends space, you are going to be waiting a very long time. The main highway is backed up for miles." "Pop the hood." "Excuse me?" Victoria bristled instantly. She clearly ran boardrooms with a single glance, but status means nothing out here. "Stick with me here." She was not used to orders from a soaked stranger in a storm. "The hood," I repeated calmly. I kept my voice patient, ensuring it carried some firm, quiet authority. "It is a '69 E-Type, gorgeous classic, but they are notorious for wet electrical issues. Just let me take a quick look under there. Unless you really prefer freezing in that fancy designer dress." Victoria just blanked, looking completely startled. I did not just nail her vintage ride in the pitch dark. I saw her expensive designer gown and called it out instantly. Intrigued and freezing, her natural curiosity finally overcame her caution. She reached down and pulled the heavy hood latch. I walked around to the front and lifted the heavy clamshell hood. Then I pulled a waterproof flashlight right out of my heavy coat pocket. Victoria watched me intently through the rain-streaked window. I moved with practiced ease, my hands working the complex engine bay without hesitation. Soon she could not just sit there uselessly while a stranger did all the hard work. She grabbed a massive umbrella off her passenger seat, pushed open her heavy door, and stepped right out into the freezing storm. She walked over and silently held the massive umbrella over my head, protecting both me and her classic engine from the worst of the pouring rain. I wiped rain from my eyes, deeply struck by this genuine, unscripted act of kindness. "Thanks, you really did not have to do this. It is freezing cold. I do not like being a passive bystander to my own problems," Victoria said crisply, holding the umbrella steady. "What is the verdict? Distributor cap?" I answered, pointing my flashlight toward a small component near the cold engine block. "Moisture got inside. It is a very common issue with these older British engines. It is shorting out the spark, which is why you lost all power." I pulled a dry rag from my pocket and began disassembling and wiping down the delicate components. "Can you actually fix it in this weather?" she asked, deep skepticism in her voice. "Temporarily. Just enough to get you back to safety, at least." I wiped my greasy hands on the dry rag, a small smile touching my lips. "Honestly, it is your lucky day. You broke down right in front of a mechanic who actually loves vintage machinery. Lucky is definitely not the word I would use tonight." Victoria muttered, teeth chattering as a freezing gust of wind swept over us. "I am supposed to be at a dreaded family dinner, and now I look like a drowned rat." I smiled. "Real character is not bought. It is revealed in how we treat people when nobody is watching. Join the club. I am heading to the absolute worst blind date of my life right now." Through the pouring rain, Victoria finally saw the man helping her. Beneath his soaked hair and cheap suit, this stranger had a rugged, striking face. He had a sharp jaw, but his eyes radiated pure warmth and kindness. A blind date? Let me guess, she is totally awful. Never met her, my sweet sister set the whole thing up. Apparently she is some stressed-out corporate executive, he explained, gently assembling the car parts with absolute care. Probably spends weekends counting money, firing people, and judging cheap shoes. I am just a mechanic raising a kid. We have absolutely nothing in common. I am just bracing for 2 hours of polite condescension. You and I see the irony. She felt a sharp, defensive guilt. The kind mechanic had no idea he was actually describing her. Maybe you are being much too quick to judge, she snapped. Maybe this corporate executive is just completely, utterly exhausted. Maybe she is surrounded by fake people and just wants a real conversation. He paused his work, looking up. The soft flashlight beam lit the space between them. Maybe, but why would someone like that want dinner with a mechanic whose truck survives on duct tape and pure hope? Because, she murmured, her icy guard melting slightly as their eyes locked. Sometimes the decent people holding the duct tape are the only ones who truly know how to fix things when they shatter. Let's watch fate unfold here. An electric, undeniable connection buzzed between these two strangers. It cut right through the freezing rain and the roaring storm around them. He cleared his throat, suddenly realizing how close they stood, and checked the engine. All right, let us see if my quick fix holds. He gently lowered the heavy hood. Try starting it now. She slid back onto her costly leather seat and slowly turned the ignition. The massive engine coughed and struggled for 1/10 second. Then it roared to life, settling into a smooth, powerful purr. A sudden, comforting wave of relief washed right over her. Wanting to return his kindness, she pulled a fine silk handkerchief from her costly coat. She offered it. For your hands, thank you so much. I would have been stuck out here in the freezing storm all night. The modest mechanic looked from the delicate silk down to his greasy fingers. I will completely ruin this. Consider it a casualty of war, she insisted, stepping closer to press the soft silk into his calloused palm. I am Victoria. Friends call me Tori. She stopped herself, surprised. She never shared her nickname with strangers. I am Dave, he replied, taking the cloth as their fingers lightly brushed. Drive carefully, Tori. Take the turn slow. It is very slick tonight. Good luck with that terrible corporate manager tonight, Dave. A genuine smile touched her lips. You and I know they will cross paths again very soon. Good luck with your dreaded dinner, the kind mechanic replied, heading to his truck. Let's watch them part ways. The beat-up truck and luxury Jaguar fade into the storm, status markers swallowed by the dark. Neither of them realized that the quiet, honest decency they just shared out on that dark, desolate highway was built with the very person they both dreaded meeting in the light. Inside the luxury restaurant, all that shallow wealth felt suffocating. Heavy red drapes blocked out the storm, shielding the rich from the messy real world, trading the raw fury of the storm for the polished pretentiousness of a string quartet. Chandeliers cast a golden glow, lighting up tables where people are judged purely by their wealth, illuminating an elite crowd who measure human worth solely by their expensive plates. David immediately felt the heavy, crushing pressure of a room where money dictates how you are treated. His simple suit, which looked perfectly decent in the honest light of his home mirror, now felt glaringly, embarrassingly cheap. Its stiff fabric looked completely outmoded next to the custom designer suits worn by the elite. Feeling completely out of place in this playground of status, he approached the host stand. Reservation for Harrington, David mumbled, his throat feeling tight. The elegant host, a man whose polished exterior hid a deeply shallow heart, slowly judged David by his wet hair and grease-stained hands. A quiet flash of disgust crossed his perfectly groomed, highly judgmental face. Ah yes, Miss Harrington's table, right this way, sir. He was led to a hidden private booth, tucked away like a shameful secret, looking out at the wild, honest storm raging over the dark bay. He sat in the premium leather, feeling like a criminal just for being real. When the sommelier offered a menu designed solely to flaunt expensive status, David politely declined, choosing simple tap water over their expensive showmanship. He checked his cracked phone screen, 7:15 in the evening. He silently hoped this wealthy stranger would stand him up so he could escape, go home, feed his daughter, and return to the honest life that actually mattered. 10 minutes later, you and I can feel the energy shift near the entrance. The wealthy patrons fell quiet, and the strings softened, bowing to the ultimate symbol of status. Victoria Harrington had finally arrived. She had dried her hair using the vents of her broken car, and though her expensive designer dress was damp at the hem, her true grace shone through. She possessed a natural strength that had nothing to do with her bank account. Claude, that pretentious host, practically tripped over his own feet, eager to worship her wealth. His desperate fawning showing just how shallow this wealthy ecosystem really is. Miss Harrington, it is an absolute honor to have you tonight. Your guest is already waiting. Please allow me. The host fawned, quickly taking her wet coat. Victoria offered a polite nod, her stomach churning at his obvious shallow insincerity. She had spent the drive planning her escape, exhausted by this culture of superficial connections. She would stay for a single drink, endure the polite chatter, invent an early morning meeting about some corporate deal, and slip away. She followed the host through a maze of shallow, fake smiles. As they reached the booth, let's watch fate take over as the helpful stranger turns his head. Victoria stood frozen as fate intervened. Her expensive, manicured hand reached out, gripping a chair as raw reality stripped away her polished composure. David's jaw dropped in disbelief. The plain glass of tap water he held slipped slightly in his hand, before he quietly set it down on the expensive linen tablecloth. He stared at the vulnerable woman standing right before him. This was the wealthy stranger he had just helped in the mud, expecting absolutely nothing in return. "Dave," Victoria whispered softly. Her expensive corporate shield vanished, leaving only her true self, Tori. David replied, his humble voice mixing utter disbelief with a gentle, warm amusement. The headwaiter glanced between them, completely unable to read the situation. "I see you two are already acquainted. I will send your server over right away." He bowed and quickly retreated. Victoria slowly slid into the leather seat across from him. She studied his kind face for a quiet moment as the silence stretched between them. Finally, a genuine, unforced laugh bubbled up from deep inside her. You are the hardworking, decent, humble single father my advisor tried to set me up with." A warm, honest smile lit up David's face, reaching his eyes. The superficial pressure of this blind date instantly vanished into thin air. "And you are the intense, high-strung executive my sister warned me about. But to be fair, she never mentioned you drove a classic '69 E-Type. Or that I would be completely stranded on the side of Interstate 90. Victoria added, shaking her head. "I really cannot believe this, of all the people to rescue me." "I told you," David smiled, leaning back, suddenly feeling comfortable in his old cheap suit. "It really was your lucky day." You and I see how real character quickly broke the ice between them. The awkward anxiety about status vanished, replaced by a genuine mutual curiosity about who they truly were. "So," David asked softly. He rested his rough hands on the table. "Tori, what does a manager do to afford a $3,000 dress and a classic Jaguar?" Victoria hesitated slightly. She always hid her extreme wealth on dates, wanting to be judged as a person. She feared the superficial shift in a man's eyes once he realized how much money she had. But in David we see a decent man who fixed her car in the freezing rain out of pure kindness. Seeing he cared nothing for the fancy restaurant's pretentiousness, she felt a sudden, powerful urge to be completely honest with him. "I am not exactly a manager, Dave," she admitted quietly. "My real name is Victoria Harrington. I am the CEO of Harrington Global Holdings." David simply blinked. He was an ordinary man, but no one in Seattle could ignore the powerful Harrington family name. They practically owned half the city skyline. They were the powerful force behind major tech companies and real estate developments across the entire Pacific Northwest. He let out a low whistle. "Billionaire CEO, wow, okay. I guess that explains why the staff treats you like visiting royalty." "Does my wealth bother you?" she asked. Victoria asked, her voice showing a rare, unpretentious vulnerability. She braced for the greedy, opportunistic looks she usually saw from status-seeking men. David met her gaze with quiet sincerity. "Honestly, it makes me retroactively terrified I didn't tighten those distributor cap screws enough. If that Jaguar breaks down again, I'm pretty sure your lawyers will take my shop." Victoria let out a surprised, completely genuine laugh. I promise my legal team has strict orders not to sue my mechanics. Let's watch closely. The server delivered heavy menus that looked like ancient leather books. David opened his and the color completely drained from his face. A simple steak was a staggering $180. Asparagus alone cost $40. He swallowed hard, the brutal financial gap between them suddenly slamming into his mind. He only had $50 in his wallet. But Victoria possessed the sharp, observant instincts of a seasoned, powerful leader. She noticed his jaw tighten and the sudden quiet panic in his eyes. Observe this quiet act of grace. Victoria closed her menu before the waiter blinked. Actually, Antoine, she said smoothly, adopting her commanding corporate voice. We will not be ordering dinner tonight, mister. Sterling and I have some urgent business to discuss elsewhere. Just a bottle of the 2015 Chateau Margaux for the table, please. Put it on my usual account. David stared, completely stunned. Tori, you don't have to. I know I don't, she interrupted gently, leaning in closer once they were alone. But I absolutely detest this restaurant. The food is pretentious and the portions are microscopic. And half the people in this room are actively plotting against the other half. I only agreed to come here because it was a neutral, heavily public zone. It's definitely public, David agreed, deeply moved by her quiet, unassuming grace. But the wine? It's a prop, she winked playfully, to keep them from kicking us out while we talk. And they most certainly talked. Stripped of all wealthy pretenses, their conversation flowed with a refreshing, honest ease. David soon found himself opening up about his daughter, Emma, describing her passion for building Lego engines and her wild, messy attempts at painting. He spoke about his father's mechanic legacy, sterling restorations, and the heavy, exhausting burden of keeping his shop alive in an increasingly cold, digital corporate world. Victoria simply listened with quiet, rapt attention. She never offered cheap pity or any unsolicited business advice. She just listened, eyes locked on his, deeply moved by his honest resilience and loving heart. In turn, she found herself confessing deep truths she had never told another soul. She spoke about the crushing, lonely isolation of her powerful corporate position, the constant, exhausting paranoia of endless boardroom betrayals, and the massive burden of carrying thousands of employees' livelihoods directly on her own shoulders. See how they connect? It sounds, David murmured quietly, swirling his untouched water. Like we're both just desperately trying to keep engines running that are constantly threatening to overheat. Victoria smiled, her expression soft and completely real. That is the most accurate assessment of my life I have ever heard. Out of nowhere, a cold shadow fell over our table. Victoria, darling, what a shocking surprise to see you slumming it. Tori's smile vanished instantly. I watched her face harden into absolute ice. It was Richard Carmichael. You and I know his type: wealth, zero actual character. He stood there draped in an expensive, custom-tailored suit. Every silver hair was perfect, but his smug grin showed a toxic character. Two equally shallow friends hovered like shadows right behind him. Richard, Tori said, her voice dropping 10 degrees, I see you haven't choked on your own bile yet today. It's a miracle. Richard chuckled, but the sound was completely hollow and cold. He turned his eyes to me, scanning my faded suit with cheap, theatrical disgust. And who is this? Surely not a new acquisition, Victoria. He looks a bit depreciated. Don't tell me you've started a charity division for the city's blue-collar unfortunates. I saw Tori's hands curl into tight fists under the table. I could tell she wanted nothing more than to splash her ice water in his arrogant face. Richard, you will leave this table immediately before I make sure. It's fine. Tori, I cut in smoothly. I wasn't about to shrink under his arrogant stare. Instead, I leaned back, totally unbothered, and calmly looked at this empty billionaire. My eyes went straight to the shiny gold Rolex Daytona on his wrist. Nice watch, I pointed out casually. Though, if you're going to wear a Daytona, you should really get it serviced. The second hand is lagging by about a quarter beat. That usually means the internal oil has completely dried out. That happens when people buy expensive things just to show off, without actually taking care of them. Richard's smug grin vanished instantly, his face turning a deep, embarrassed red. He quickly covered the luxury watch with his other hand. Excuse me, he stammered. I'm just saying, I continued calmly. My tone was steady, carrying the weight of simple truth. You can cover a rusted chassis in a $10,000 paint job. But anyone who actually knows what to look for can still hear the engine knocking. Have a good evening, Richard. His investors awkwardly coughed and looked the other way. Richard was humiliated. Let's face it, wealthy bullies always freeze when you ignore their shallow rules. He shot me a venomous glare. Enjoy your charity dinner, he spat, before spinning around and storming away. Tori just stared at me, completely stunned. Even after all her years in that heartless corporate world. She confessed later she'd never seen anyone dismantle Richard with such effortless, quiet precision. You, she breathed, a spark of real admiration in her eyes, are incredibly dangerous, Dave. I deal with stubborn, overinflated tires every day at my auto shop. I just grinned. He was a very easy read. Looking around that flashy, stifling room, I suddenly felt completely claustrophobic. You know what? You were completely right. This place is awful. Tori reached across the table, acting on pure impulse, and squeezed my hand. Her soft skin felt warm against my rough, calloused palm. Let's leave. Where to? True character isn't about wealth. I followed her, heart pounding, as she pulled me from the booth. You mentioned your daughter likes burgers. Victoria smiled. Her eyes shone with genuine warmth as we navigated the crowded tables toward the exit. I know a spot downtown that makes the absolute greasiest, most spectacular bacon cheeseburger in Seattle, and I'm buying. The heavy rain had finally reduced to a light drizzle. Soon my rusted Ford F-150 pulled into the gravel lot of Mick's All-Night Diner. A stark, honest contrast to the velvet-wrapped pretension we had just left behind. Here, the main sources of light were a flickering neon sign buzzing like an angry hornet, and the harsh fluorescent tubes hanging over cracked, red vinyl booths. The air was thick with the rich, honest smell of onions, sizzling beef, and coffee. Victoria stepped out, her $3,000 designer dress brushing the wet, dirty gravel. She didn't even flinch. Picture this, she breathed in the greasy air, pure relief washing over her face. As we walked inside, the bell above the door chimed cheerfully. Mick, a burly guy with a thick beard and flour-dusted apron, looked up from the grill. Davy, haven't seen you in forever. Usual? I nodded. Make it two. Mick, I called out, guiding Victoria to a corner booth, and double the bacon. Victoria slid into the vinyl booth, the worn material squeaking slightly. She looked entirely out of place, yet completely at ease. When Mick dropped off two massive, glistening burgers and fries, she didn't hesitate. She grabbed the burger with both hands, taking a huge, messy bite. She closed her eyes in pure, unadulterated bliss. Oh my God, she mumbled, grabbing a cheap napkin to catch a stray drip. This is spectacular. That fancy restaurant could never. I smiled, watching her shed the cold, defensive armor she wore for the elites. Under those harsh diner lights, with her hair messy from the rain, and a smudge of sauce on her hand, she looked breathtakingly real. The billionaire facade had vanished, leaving a woman who was genuinely humble and intelligent, surprisingly funny, and tired of the endless superficial status games. So, I said, stealing a fry from her basket, you run a massive empire, drive a temperamental classic car, and you stand up for everyday mechanics against snobby board members. Who exactly are you? She wiped her mouth, her expression turning thoughtful. I'm someone who spends 90% of my time playing high-stakes chess, where I don't actually like any of the other players. I inherited the business from my grandfather. He taught me to be ruthless, build high walls, and never show weakness. But lately, she paused, looking down, lately those walls feel like a prison. I'm tired of everything being completely transactional. She looked up. You and I know true character is revealed in moments like this. What about you, Dave? Why keep fighting a losing battle with a struggling garage when you could take a safe corporate job and have real security? Because of the history, David answered honestly, his voice staying low and steady. My dad built sterling restorations from the ground up. He taught me that when something breaks, you don't just toss it out. You take time to understand the problem, you find the damaged parts, and you put in the hard work to bring it back to life. These old machines have a real soul. I need my daughter, Emma, to see that some things are worth fighting for, even when all the odds are against you. Victoria reached across that chipped diner table, her fingers gently brushing against his calloused hand. That small, genuine act of connection sent a sudden jolt straight through his chest. I think Emma is incredibly lucky to have a mechanic dad who understands the real value of fixing things instead of just replacing them. They sat there for hours, drinking terrible drip coffee, talking until that buzzing neon sign outside finally flickered and died. They shared stories of their childhoods and those truly spectacular human failures. Along with the quiet hidden dreams they almost never spoke aloud. For the first time in years, David forgot the crushing weight of his shop debts. And Victoria finally stopped feeling the suffocating pressure of her massive business empire. Let's look closely here, two weary people finding a fateful sanctuary in a stranger's quiet kindness. David finally dropped her off at a grand gated estate overlooking the dark, quiet lake. The early morning light was just beginning to paint the sky in bruised purple and gold. Victoria stood right there on that grand, expensive driveway, her arms wrapped tightly against the bitter morning chill. "Thank you, Dave, for fixing my vintage car. For saving me from Lassens. For the burger, just thank you." "Anytime, Tori," David replied softly, leaning out the window of his rusty truck. "And hey, if that Jaguar ever acts up again, you know where to find me." "I do," she smiled, a deep promise lingering in her eyes. "I really do." You and I know reality always crashes back down. 3 days later, it hit David hard. He stood in the dimly lit quiet bay of his auto repair shop, staring directly at a final foreclosure notice from the bank. His hard-working hands, covered in fresh motor oil, were trembling slightly. He had exactly 2 weeks to find $40,000 or lose his garage forever. His father's proud legacy, and his only way to provide for little Emma. Emma, completely blind to the disaster, sat on a sturdy stool near his wooden workbench, humming happily while snapping together a fairly complex Lego spaceship. David rubbed his tired eyes, fighting a rising wave of pure panic in his throat. He had not heard a single word from Victoria since he dropped her off. He kept telling himself that her silence was probably for the best. Fateful miracles rarely happened to humble single dads smelling of WD-40. She was back in her wealthy tower, while he was left sinking in his grease pit. Suddenly, a familiar deep throaty engine roar echoed off the brick garage walls. David spun around, his heavy heart leaping straight into his throat. Pulling into the sunlit driveway was that pristine British racing green 1969 Jaguar E-Type. The roaring engine cut out and the heavy car door swung open. Victoria stepped out, but gone was the fancy designer silk dress or the tailored boardroom suit. You see, true character isn't bought. She returned in fitted jeans, a tee, and a worn leather jacket. Fateful connections ignore status. Despite her wealth, she looked radiant and completely at home in my gritty shop. She walked right into my garage, her heels clicking purposefully across the greasy concrete floor. She spotted my daughter immediately and smiled genuinely, crouching right down to eye level with my little girl. "That is a very impressive spaceship," Victoria noted warmly. "Are those the new hyperdrive thrusters?" Emma beamed with pure joy, holding up her colorful blocks. "Yeah, my dad says if you do not build the engine right, the whole ship falls apart." "Your dad is a very smart man," Victoria said, standing up and locking eyes with me. Her eyes held a fierce determination, but also a gentle, genuine kindness. I wiped my greasy hands on a rag, stepping forward, my mind racing. "Tori, what are you doing here?" She reached into her expensive leather bag, pulling out a thick, legal-sized folder. She placed it on my cluttered workbench, right next to that stressful foreclosure notice. "I have a massive problem, Dave," Victoria stated plainly. Her voice shifted into a professional but distinctly playful rhythm. "Harrington Global has an executive fleet of over 50 vehicles, not to mention my personal collection of 12 vintage European sports cars. For the last 2 years, our fleet contract went to a massive, overcharging dealership. They underdeliver and do not know the difference between a distributor cap and a coffee cup." I stared down at that folder, my breath catching. "What is this?" "That," Victoria said, tapping the folder, "is a 3-year exclusive fleet maintenance and restoration contract. It comes with a substantial upfront retainer, more than enough to clear any, say, banking misunderstandings this auto shop might currently be facing." I was left entirely speechless. I looked from the contract to Tori, pride and hesitation warring deep inside me. "Tori, I cannot take a handout, I won't." "It is absolutely not a handout," she countered, stepping closer and invading my space in the best way. I am a businesswoman, David. I do not make bad investments. I saw firsthand how you treated a stranger, fixing my Jaguar in a torrential downpour. I watched you diagnose a complex mechanical failure by sound alone. You are a master of your craft. I need the absolute best, and you are the best. This is a mutually beneficial corporate acquisition of your services. She paused, her professional mask melting away to reveal the warm woman from the diner. She reached out, her clean, manicured hands gently gripping my oil-stained fingers. Plus, she whispered, her eyes searching mine, I really wanted an excuse to see you again. And I figured you would not accept an invitation back to Lassence. A slow, brilliant smile finally broke across my face, completely banishing the dark shadows of stress that had haunted me all morning. I just looked down at our joined hands. We both knew the gap between our social classes was blurring into something beautiful. You are right, I murmured, stepping closer until her perfume mixed with the shop's metallic tang. I hate that restaurant, but I know a great little place that makes terrible drip coffee. It is a date, Victoria smiled, leaning right in. When they finally kissed in that dusty, sunlit garage, amidst grease-stained engine parts and a little girl humming over her Legos, David realized a truth money could never buy. Real value isn't handed to you pre-packaged on some shiny showroom floor. It begins when no one is watching with simple, quiet kindness. Just choosing to truly understand someone and building a life together piece by piece. If you and I value real character over superficial status and the beauty of healing broken things, please tap that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs reminding that destiny rewards quiet kindness. Subscribe for more of these heartwarming and inspiring stories sent straight to your feed every single week.